All right, we ready?
We're ready.
Let's roll.
Fantastic. Welcome everybody to our first episode of the Scuttlebutt. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. Super excited to bring you the first episode of our new program. You might be interested or want to know what the Veterans Breakfast Club is. We are a nonprofit based in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. And we're super excited to do some education with this new program, the Scuttlebutt. We want to dive into some great military headlines and bring you some of the information that's going on in the military sphere. With me today is our Executive Director, Todd DiPestino. How you doing, Todd?
Ahoy, ahoy.
Our Associate Director, Lauren Del Ricci. Also Navy veteran.
I guess ahoy, ahoy then, fine, okay.
Ahoy, works with Scuttlebutt, right? And also joining us, James Martin, Marine Corps veteran. James, how you doing today?
I'm fine, and you?
I'm wonderful, thanks. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So how is the Scuttlebutt going to work? Well, we're gonna have certain parts of our episode that are going to be headlines. We're gonna dive into a main story, and then we're gonna finish up with something called the Scuttlebutt. But first, your first question might be, what is a scuttlebutt and why do you keep saying that weird word? I'm gonna bounce that to Lauren. Lauren, what is a scuttlebutt?
Yeah, well, in the Navy, there's, different words for all kinds of normal things. The wall is a bulkhead, the floor is a deck, and a water fountain is a scuttlebutt. And I rarely drank out of them in the Navy.
Oh, now, any reason why you would not drink out of a water fountain?
I don't know, it kind of grossed me out.
I don't blame you. Also, it's sort of like gossip, like rumor mill, sort of we're talking around the water cooler, right?
Right.
Yeah, so it's in a way sort of what we're thinking, like, hey, this is a great reason for us to chat about some headlines, talk amongst ourselves about what's going on. But I think something also we need to highlight here is that Todd and myself are not veterans. We are ordinary citizens. We have a passion for the military and for veteran stories. And I think part of what we would like to bring to everyone with the Scuttlebutt are these stories that kind of can help you connect to what the military is and what the culture is.
I think the reason for this very podcast is that there's a gap. There's a civilian-military divide, and it's real, and it's serious, and I think it's not healthy for our democracy. It's not healthy for veterans. It's not healthy for non-veterans like me. I think we have two populations that are really divided. The 99.5% of Americans who aren't serving, and the vast majority of us who don't really have any close connections with people who did serve. And then you have this much smaller veterans community, especially young veterans like James and Lauren, who inhabit a world where they've spent time in the military, they've spent a lot of time in the civilian world, and they have kind of in a sense a foot in both camps. And I think the civilian world has a hard time relating to the military experience, to the veteran experience of life. And so I'm hoping this podcast will be kind of a conversation that could help to bridge that divide.
Great, thank you. And James, that brings me to a thought for you is why the interest in joining the VBC? What sort of brings you to this organization?
The one thing that brings me back to this organization is one that I know from my own personal experience that it's been interesting since I've left the military to see how many veterans really hang out with each other and have a conversation, to share their stories, to pass information and things like that. VBC has done an excellent job going about the stories of the veteran experience. And you can go to a library and read all the books you want from top generals and everything else like that. And that's all fine and dandy, but rarely do you hear about from the guy in the trenches or the lady in the engine room. My own passion of wanting to hear the stories to tell my own story and to watch where we've come and to unite us all. It's all right here.
That's great. That's great. Great answer. Thank you, James. Yeah, so let me take a side note and say, please like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell. I think those are all the different things that you can do with our video.
Share it.
Share it. Yep.
Make
Yep,
sure you
please
share it.
You know, that helps what I'm going to term spread the scuttlebutt. So help us spread the cuddlebutt. Help us spread the scuttlebutt by doing any one of those four things, please. Diving right into sort of what makes the scuttlebutt important. You know, we want to make the military relatable, but we know that a lot of people probably don't really understand the military or know what's going on in the military. So I think that was what brought VBC to say, hey, let's create a program for this. And so without further ado, let's dive into some of our headlines. First headline I came across here is the more recent fire that broke out on the USS Bonham Richard. That was on July 12th. Todd, you're laughing.
Yeah, Lauren, you want to correct Sean?
It's the Bonham Richard, if you will, Sean.
Okay.
No, but actually, if you Google it, in the first phonetics, it'll say Bonham Richard, right? And then it'll say the French pronunciation is the Bonham Richard.
I have a Pittsburghese accent, so if I do it with the Bonham Richard, that's what's going to come out.
That is a great name for a ship. That's a great name for a ship.
It is, and you know the history of it. It was actually named after one of Benjamin Franklin's surnames. He had a bunch, and I looked this up, and one of them is Silence Dogood, Harry Meanwell, Alice Addertongue, Richard Saunders, which I believe is the one that the Bonhomme Richard. I'm never going to be able to do it. It was named after. And these are all also noms de plume, which I guess means pen name. But Richard Saunders was the Richard of Poor Richard's Almanac, which was first published in 1732. And that's what they named this boat after, correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
And then you just called it a boat. Oh man, we're gonna have some fun here today, Sean.
This is why we have the program, because coming out of the civilian world, I say boat. That's not a boat. That's a warship. Am I correct? Is that the correct terminology?
Lauren, what's the difference between a ship and a boat?
We have 45 minutes. Go.
Well, I believe the Bonham Richard is an amphibious assault ship, right? Used to carry Marines, I think up to like 1,200 Marines, and then deploy them. And you can't fit 1,200 Marines on a boat, Todd. So I think that's probably the difference right there in a nutshell, if I may. But what's going on with the Bonham Richard there, Sean?
Yes, the Bonham Richard. July 12th, there was a fire that started. It burned for 4 days, and it took 400 sailors and 16 nearby ships to fight the blaze. Inside the ship, temperatures reached about 1,000 degrees, so quite dangerous. Luckily, there were no fatalities. They had about 68 military and civilian firefighters that were treated for injuries, smoke inhalation, heat exhaustion. But you know, this was a serious thing. This was nationwide news. And the latest thing that broke was that they were actually investigating one of the sailors for arson, which we're not sure who. They haven't charged anybody yet. There's been no motive found. But that's big news, is saying, you know, there might have been arson involved in this. You know, Lauren, you know, you come from the Navy, you served on a ship. You know, how serious is this? You know, the Bonham Richard was also at dry dock, which was interesting.
Right. Yeah. And to speak really quick to the arson, it would be sacrilege for, you know, a sailor to set his or her own ship on fire. So I really hope that's not true. I'll start with that. but it's always dangerous. I worked in the boiler room, which is kind of adjacent to the engine room, but both very flammable spaces right on the ship. And when you're in dry dock, it's basically like a kind of a big cubbyhole where your vessel is kind of there, and it's just there's no water around it, and because they're working, so usually the ship makes its own power, right, from whatever source it is. If it's nuclear powered, if it's steam powered, like the Blue Ridge I was on. But when you're in dry dock, you have tons and tons and tons of big cords. Like picture the movie Jaws, when he goes to kill Jaws and he makes them eat that big cord, like tons of those going on and off the ship and the bow, and tons of work going on as far as welding and things like that. So it makes it ultra flammable. And with the Bonhomme Richard, since they were in dry dock, their emergency like halon system or whatever their fire control system was deactivated. And also where usually, there would be many more sailors on the ship to kind of combat it for damage control, which is inherent in every sailor, coming up in the Navy. Damage control. Everyone has a battle station. Everyone knows how to fight a fire. Everyone knows the different types of fires. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Not to throw water on electric fire, right? So that was a big problem, that there was not a lot of immediate damage control, and there was no halon released to kind of squelch that on a more immediate basis.
If a ship is more at risk of having a fire when it's on dry dock, why would they decide that to deactivate the halon system that could suppress a fire quickly?
That's a great question.
Yeah, it's something that I'm, and something I want to mention about the Scuttlebutt is we might not have all the answers here, but I think these might be questions that civilians might ask as they start to look into certain headlines and say, well, wait, what's a halon system, or why was that deactivated? It's one that sort of popped up in my head, that you'd think that this system would be, this is probably your number one fire prevention system, and it's deactivated. Like, and why would that be deactivated?
Yeah, they could have been working on it. There could have been no power going to it. There's just all kinds of havoc going on when you're in dry dock, because the purpose of dry dock is to refurbish the ship, to make repairs, to make updates and improvements and things like that. So there could be a myriad of reasons why it was deactivated. I don't know for sure, so I won't pretend I do. But I'm really glad. I will say I'm really glad no one lost their life in this. And I watched it go on for 4 days, and I thought to myself, geez, why can they not get this out? You know what I mean? And so that was worrisome.
Todd, any thoughts more on the Bonhomme Richard?
Not really. I'm surprised it doesn't happen more often. I mean, we don't hear about, Navy vessels catching on fire. This was a very big one. They called it, an amphibious assault ship, but it's actually a small aircraft carrier. It's huge. It's like, a complement of 1,200 men and officers, personnel. And the fact that it caught fire in dry dock, that it was on fire for 4 days, that it may never, it may have to be scrapped. I think it might not even be able to be repaired. I'm kind of surprised it doesn't happen more often, because there's a lot of dangerous equipment, flammable materials on any kind of ship like this. I imagine that fire must be almost the number one kind of, maybe right behind sinking, fear that would happen to a ship. And so they're all kind of fire suppression controls. I imagine that maybe some of the fire suppression was turned off, as Lauren said, because maybe power was cut to parts of the ship. But also, I think when you're working on a ship, you're using, welding equipment and generating all kinds of heat and smoke that might trigger the fire suppression. So you don't want that to happen. I think it's a shocker. I would be surprised if it weren't arson, actually, because I think it just doesn't happen that often. I'd be surprised if it weren't arson.
I think one thing that really interests me about it is I imagine the inside of a ship being very gray, very steel, iron, and to me that doesn't seem like flammable. But I'm guessing that the liquids, chemicals used on the ship are highly flammable. And those are the types of things that would cause maybe a chemical fire that could heat to that extreme and cause severe damage, and made up also not be able to be put out. James, yeah.
Also, you have to remember the type of fuel used, and that's, I think that right there, that dichotomy is what a lot of people don't understand, is that you're using JP8. This is a little bit stronger than diesel,
Mm.
and it has a very high flame point. It takes a lot to set it on fire, but once it's on fire, because it has so much oil in it, because it's a little bit stronger than regular diesel, it's going to burn for a while, and it's going to burn hot for a while. So if I was a volunteer firefighter in high school, so we did these practice runs, you won't believe how hot the inside of a room gets. Now imagine you put this inside of a steel box. It gets hot, it starts melting the steel, and it just keeps spreading from there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was surprised I didn't watch the whole thing go boom sometime in those 4 days. You have thousands and thousands of gallons of fuel,
Yeah.
like James said, and I was just kind of holding my breath for that to, and I'm really glad it didn't happen, but I'm surprised it didn't. I think they said something like, I don't know, someone 30,000 gallons, or I don't remember how exactly much, but they did have a lot of fuel on board. So yeah, that's
Well,
a good point, James.
That's very interesting, and that speaks kind of to, Todd, your point about the potential for it being arson. If this is such a high flash point, what would get it to that flash point, and why? And I think it's smart for them definitely to investigate it. We'll try to loop back on this if there'll be more developments. But I'd like to move on to our next headline, and that is not so much a positive one as well, is sort of the deaths at Fort Hood, and this year alone, there have been about 23 deaths among the soldiers there at Fort Hood. These include 7 off-duty accidents, 7 suicides, 1 combat-related death, 4 homicides, one of them being the highly publicized death of Vanessa Guillen, excuse me. This is sort of really concerning for us, as we also look back at the history of Fort Hood and see that in 2009 there was a mass shooting where 13 people were killed, including an unborn child, which is just terrible. 32 others were injured, and 5 years later after that, in 2014, there were 16 people injured and 3 people killed in another shooting accident. And it kind of brings me to a thought of, is there a problem at Fort Hood, and should we be concerned? And I'm intrigued. Even before we started recording the episode, we sort of started chatting with James about living on a base, and you come into the military expecting to live on a base and be pretty safe. Am I right? No. So there's an inherent risk to living on a military base.
I won't say that there's an inherent risk. I will say this: if there's anything, and Todd, you as a historian, Lauren, you've done this dance the same as I. The military is a microcosm of society, so always remember that. So when you're talking about the military as a whole, and you think that you're going to be safe, there's some things that you just won't expect that you'll have to engage, like when you find out that I've had Marines that I was the first Black person they ever met. I was their first example of anything that looks like me. I've had that on the flip side, where somebody from the country, this is the first run-in with white people. So you have all these different little things that happen. So a lot of the problems that you see in the newspaper, they happen right there on a base, like, because you have all these different types of people interacting that maybe never don't know how to deal with other people, and you're expecting 18-year-old to 20-some-year-old young adults to act like grown men and women because of the things they have to do, and inherently comes problems. And military bases are just as bad as, I read that report, the physician that killed 10 people in a mass shooting. How many mass shootings have we seen not on a military base? It happened there. Women coming up missing and murdered, that's happened around this nation. It's happening on a military base. So a lot of these things I have to equate to going, Some of it's just people. It's just, it happens to get magnified because it's the military installation. Now, all these happening at the same base, now that's a problem.
Todd, is there an apples to apples comparison? Speaking to James' point about it's a microcosm of society, is there a place in society maybe that sort of, kind of gives a reason to this, or
Yeah, I think it's a complicated issue. I think James is right. The military is a microcosm of society. So if you have something if you have a trend that's occurring in the general society at large, you're going to see it reflected in the military. If there's an increase in drug use, there's going to be increased drug use in the military. If there's increase in violent crime, among a certain segment, you're going to see that increase in the segment in the military. Having said that, however, I would disagree with James in the sense that I think the data shows that military bases are safe, much safer in terms of violent crime rates than the country as a whole. It's hard to actually do an apples to apples comparison with the data, because if you ask the internet, what's the population of Fort Hood, you're going to get 35 different answers. And if we just take 45,000, let's say that there are 45,000 uniformed personnel at Fort Hood, and you kind of compare the crime rate among those 45,000 to the crime rate of a city of 45,000. And you could take, any city. I live in Pittsburgh, so Altoona is a nearby city. Altoona, PA, has a crime rate almost exactly average, nationwide average. It's about 350 violent crimes per 100,000 people. I think if you extrapolate the crime that's happening now at Fort Hood, it's something like 129 violent crimes for the year. So it's much lower than Altoona. It's because there is an expectation of safety. Maybe it's a misplaced expectation, but there is an expectation, I think, that when you live on base in a gated community with armed guards around it, that one thing you could count on is that you're going to be safe. And I know that that's maybe a little bit naive on my part, but I think that is what makes this crime rise so shocking and so serious, is that it represents more than just crime, it's a betrayal.
And I think with the Vanessa Guillen murder, that sort of took national headlines, and that sort of brought Fort Hood really into focus. And I'm sure a couple of the others, especially the sort of the mass shootings, those probably hit major headlines. But especially in sort of today's climate in the nation, I think that grabbed our attention and made us start to focus in on Fort Hood a little bit more. That has actually led to an order that there's going to be a civilian review at Fort Hood to look at the command climate and the culture. There's going to be three men and two women that are going to be a part of that civilian review. There's been a shift in leadership at Fort Hood that was just recently announced, that Major General John B. Richardson IV, he's going to become the new acting senior commander at Fort Hood, replacing Major General Scott Efland. This comes after some outcry in what's wrong with the leadership, and we should have somebody else there if these types of problems, these deaths are going to keep happening. It doesn't seem like Efland is actually going to be punished. He's just sort of be moved to the side a bit. Richardson's going to take over, and as what they described as a slide over. And there's actually going to be an internal investigation as well. So we have a civilian investigation, we have an internal investigation, we have a change in leadership. Lauren, do you think this is going to institute change?
I sure hope so. I just want to say it's not the usual to call in an outside task force. It virtually never happens with military sexual trauma. It is always handled, and poorly most of the time, within your chain of command, within your unit. The family had to request that there was an outside investigation. Okay, so that was a huge win for military sexual trauma survivors, victims, throughout the entire military. This is going to help affect change. So you're talking about, I don't know on the other level, on the crime level, I haven't, dipped into that too much, but James, agree with me or not, I think it's not the usual. The military tries to keep it in the ranks, right? It tries to handle it. It's rare, right, that you're going to get punished on the outside world, and that's got to change.
I'm really interested to see what they come up with, because
Me
they may
too.
have been able to save a life. They might have been
think-
able to save a life. She'd have been able to report outside her command.
So hopefully, Vanessa will not have lost her life in vain, that her service and her legacy can live on through the changes that hopefully come, from the tragic and untimely death. And I can only hope that sincerely, because Todd made a point, and Todd, jump in here, not only handling what's going on in the military, but the perspectives of like women joining in the future, right? You mentioned that to me, and that was something I didn't think about, to be honest. So I was curious where your head was there.
Yeah, well, I mean, where my head was, just apart from, the moral, ethical, even criminal issue of sexual harassment, sexual assault, which is a major, major problem in the military, it's an issue for the military. I mean, we're going to get to this in a little bit, but only the military I think it all comes back to the military is a subculture of young men. Really is. What, 80, 83, 85% of those who serve on active duty are men. You have a small minority who are women. And unfortunately, the military is starving for talent right now, starving for kind of skilled positions. So it's a very hard sell nowadays, especially among people who aren't really familiar with the military as a career option. And so, women tend to be highly skilled and highly competent workers. And if you can't recruit them because there's a culture of harassment and even violence, you're gonna hurt as an organization. So I think this is a major problem that the military has to solve, and they have to solve it quickly. But that's just one part, I think, of military culture, which is, again, I think it all comes down to that. Our military is mostly young men. The military does a good job of handling. I'll put it this way: handling the lack of full development of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. That is the part that develops last. It doesn't really solidify until age, and that's the part of executive decision making. That's the part of where you're able to assess risk, where you're able to assess outcomes of behavior, where you're able to plan things. If I do A, that'll cause B, and the outcome will be C. That kind of thinking through things is not fully developed, especially in men, until age 25 or so.
The last headline I have here before our main story, there's been a rash of military training accidents lately. One as recently as August 31st, but I'll jump back just a bit to June 30th. Off the coast of San Clemente Island, off the west coast, we had 8 Marines and a sailor who passed away during a training exercise in an amphibious assault vehicle that sunk. And then, a month later, August 27th, we had 2 special operations school soldiers who were killed in a Black Hawk helicopter accident. August 28th, there was a motor transport operator who died, 27 years old, in a vehicle collision. And then just the other day, August 31st, an E-2 Hawkeye Navy surveillance plane crashed. But thankfully, everybody was able to bail out and was safe from that accident. I don't know if there's a reason for these accidents, but we're obviously doing many different training exercises around the globe consistently, and these are very dangerous, using high-tech equipment that have the potential for failure. Lauren, James, in your training exercises, did you ever feel that it was unsafe? Did you ever feel like, oh, okay, I gotta be mission ready here now, because any sort of distraction and there could be a fatality?
I'm gonna go to James. I want to hear what you have to say. I know training accidents are, a big part of playing with huge guns like James likes to do. So
Look, we had to be very, very careful about what we did and what we didn't do and the precautions we put in place. So, I mean, there was enough training before firing one round. So this way we made sure that people were doing it safely. Because for us, we're not talking just, I mean, let's talk about the weapon system itself, how heavy it is, what it's capable of. The 7-ton that tows it, the 100-plus-pound rounds that once they detonate have a 50-meter kill radius and a 100-meter damage radius on top of that. So 150 meters of you don't want to be in this circle. We tried to err on the side of caution when it came to everything, but some things just happen. I was part of a unit in North Carolina that once I got there was probably about a couple months. I remember it made actually headline news. The howitzer, the big cannon like the one that's behind my head, the one that blew up in Fort Bragg, was the battery I ended up going to after I pinned on staff. I was their operations chief, and I had Marines that were on that gun when it popped open, and it was nothing more than it was raining, and the shell that we had has a small little hole. Rain got in there, and that's all it took. It was nothing we could do there. We did everything. Everything else was done right. That's why no one got in trouble for it. No one got fired or went to jail for it. Accidents tend to happen. I had a young Marine that actually passed away from working on one of the howitzers when the tube slipped out, and he was up underneath it, and it hit him right in the chest. What can you do? That was system failure. So inherently, there is a danger when you're talking about working with these very expensive, very delicate pieces of gear. It's inherent, but you do your best to try to make sure it doesn't happen.
And something that I've consistently heard from the veterans is that the training is so extensive, and that many of them go back to say, I wouldn't have survived without my training. My training is what I relied on. So, these gentlemen that unfortunately lost their lives during training, they were being trained, I believe, at the highest extent that they could be. And like you said, mechanical failure happens, and it's unfortunate that it can happen also in the military. But we want to dive into our main story, and this being the first episode of the Scuttlebutt, we want to sort of highlight who serves. And that we were going to take a look at through sort of two lenses across the country, geographically and demographically in some way, just to kind of highlight, the military, active military is less than 0.5% of our United States population. So, you can very easily get to the question of who is serving. And one stat here I'll highlight just to start us off geographically, we have 50 states in our country, but 10 states with the highest active duty military populations. And I doubt that anybody would be able to guess these ones, but two of them.
You got a hand up.
We should make it up.
Yes.
We should have buzzers. We should have buzzers where we.
Okay, James, shoot.
Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, New York. Ooh, no, not New York. California.
Nope. Mm-hmm.
How many I got so far?
Virginia.
Yeah, but say Virginia.
Virginia.
North, South Carolina.
North.
Georgia.
Yep.
Alabama.
Nope.
Louisiana.
Nope.
Ooh, okay.
Alabama, though. Alabama
Yeah.
has very high rates. Yeah.
Well, Washington State, Hawaii, Colorado.
Okay.
But to speak to your point, you picked a lot of southern states. Am I correct?
Oh, a few of them.
Yeah.
A few of them.
Because a lot of our active military members come from southern states. Is that right, Todd?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll say, where I grew up and where I live in a affluent suburb of Pittsburgh, where there is a large white population, large professional population, highly educated population. Here, where I live, I would say that the assumption is that the military, very few people from this community, Mount Lebanon, enter the military. And I would say that maybe a predominant view of the military would be that it's filled with people who are from lower income families who really don't have any other career options. And so they end up in the military. And they're absolutely wrong. That is not if you look at the demographics of who serves in the military, that is not who serves. The people who serve are generally from middle income, like the three middle quintiles of household income in the nation is really strongly represented. Underrepresented are the very people at the top, the top quintile, and people at the bottom quintile of income. So the very poor and the rather rich are underrepresented in the military. The military comes from, in other words, generally the middle class. However, there are these distinctive demographic characteristics of those who serve, and one very strong characteristic is region. There are certain regions that are underrepresented and certain regions that are overrepresented. Big overrepresentation in South Carolina, overrepresentation, as we said, in the U.S. South, in Western states, underrepresentation in states, the New England states, states like Pennsylvania, some Midwestern states. Washington, D.C. has very, very low rates of recruitment. North Dakota, for some reason, very low rates of recruitment, but Alaska, Hawaii, very high.
Nobody lives in North Dakota, so really that's
what is it about North Dakota?
To our North Dakota listeners, but
North Dakota should be enlisting in high numbers, and they're not. I don't know why that is. So, it is a distinct demographic, and it's really interesting to kind of dive in to what makes people join, what encourages people to join, what discourages people to join. There's an overrepresentation of Black Americans in the military, Black women. So the military is less white than the nation as a whole. That's one important characteristic.
And that's changed over years. That's if you jump back to 1970, there was 1% female representation and 10% Black representation. But that's gained dramatically to today. If you're looking at, 2017, we had 16% women representation in all active duty. That's a huge jump.
Yeah, that's a huge jump since 1970 in the participation of women in the military. The really most recent change, and this seems to be accelerating, is the number of women in high-ranking positions, the number of women in the officer corps. That's really changing rapidly, increasing. Huge numbers of women proportionally in the military are serving as officers rather than enlisted. Mm-hmm. The Marines are interesting because demographically they're smallest. They're by far the youngest. They're very, very young. People don't last long in the Marines. It's hard to make a career. You don't find many retired Marines. There aren't that many who joined the Marines and served 20 years. James was on track. You were a rarity to do that. You did 15 years. That's a long time to serve in the Marine Corps. Most people don't last that long. They cycle in, cycle out. It's a game for the very young. It's overwhelmingly white. It's whiter than the other branches, except for the Coast Guard, which is very, very white. Hispanics serve in large numbers in the Marine Corps, but not in the other branches. Not many women serve in the Marine Corps. It has a very distinctive demographic. Each branch really does. Black women serve in large numbers in the Army, in the Air Force, but not in the Coast Guard or the Marines. Each branch has its own kind of. Asian Americans don't serve in large numbers anywhere.
This is something that we're going to pick up on in episode 2 and go from the who serves to the why do they serve. I'm super excited by the Scuttlebutt round. One, because it's our title, but two, because it's sort of a hot take as we look at military headlines and just see something that interests us or historically interests us about the military. This could be anything. We don't know what's going to come out of it. But I definitely want to start with Todd. I know that you're.
Oh yeah. I mean, I
Chomping at
live
the
for the
bit.
Scuttlebutt round. I wish I would love to be on a podcast called the Scuttlebutt, because that's like, I am a font of useless information, just a font of useless information. I have so much of it and I don't know what to do with it. And so I need something called the Scuttlebutt to express it. And
Well, welcome to the Scuttlebutt round. This was built
yeah.
for you.
And I think the biggest challenge for me is always going to be what useless piece of information I throw out there. I thought that I would talk about Gimpy Joe, but I thought I will not talk about Gimpy Joe. I will talk about the father of the Navy, John Paul Jones, the man, the captain of the first Bonhomme Richard. I think there have been 4 Bonhomme Richards. This one that caught on fire was the last one. The USS Yorktown, the second one, was going to be named Bonhomme Richard, but the first Yorktown was sunk at Midway, and so they named the second one after it. The first Bonhomme Richard was actually a merchant ship owned by the French East India Company. It shuttled back and forth from Europe to Asia, and it was in service for about 30 years, and then in 1778, the French gave it to the United States. John Paul Jones eventually took command of the Bonhomme Richard, and then he became kind of the founding father of the U.S. Navy. Most people don't know much about John Paul Jones, but he was a murderer. He was a brutal leader. He was a slave trader. And he ended up kind of dying in France as a retired rear admiral for the Russian Navy. He came to Virginia to escape the law. He was a fugitive from the law. He had flogged one sailor to death. And again, he was captain of a ship at age 21, 22, 23. So prefrontal cortex, not developed. And he ends up going to Philadelphia to try to get a commission. He gets one. And then he has this fairly illustrious but very controversial Navy career. And maybe for another Scuttlebutt, I'll talk about his attempt to actually raid Great Britain.
James, I want to pop to you for our next Scuttlebutt. I read a headline about a Marine, this is recent news, that he broke the record for the shooting range during training at the Marine Corps training. How big of a deal is that? Is it difficult? Is this actually a news headline grabber?
Absolutely. One, because there's a few little things that I learned in my time in the Marine Corps, is that women shoot traditionally better than men. Low resting heart rate, whole science thing, we can go into that. That's fine. But to have a brand new gentleman come up out of nowhere, so he's basically a recruit or first year in, and for him to shoot 2 points under a perfect, that's really good. But for him to then go perfect on table 2, which is where you have to shoot failure to stop drills, moving targets. So there'll be somebody in the pit with a silhouette of a target and walk it, and he's tapping, tap, 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 as it's going down the thing and scoring a perfect. That's some good shooting.
Yeah.
And
what was your score? Did you have to do that?
Yeah, I actually, that table 2 started in 2005. So from 2005 on, every time I went to the range, that's how you did it. Mm-hmm. Lucky for me, I shot expert a few times, so I got to skip a year every now and again. But to shoot a perfect, I didn't shoot almost a perfect. I was good, mm-hmm. Not that good. And we're talking, that was a midst of a lot of points. I think to get expert was like 220, and you still had 30 more points to go. So he was shooting perfect from before he even hit the 500-yard line. That's great. That is amazing shooting. And then for him to go right in the table 2, and if he's never owned that weapon, he never shot that weapon, if he's not an avid hunter and he went and did that, that's incredible. So good on him.
That's what I was going to say. Did he have some sort of unfair advantage? Did he do a lot of hunting, or was this like a natural talent? Like he just like came out the womb shooting?
I don't know, but whatever it was, keep tagging. Keep tagging, because that right there, that's a career maker. You can turn around, and if he's like a infantry guy, that's how you get one of those sexier jobs, that scout sniper thing like that, like designated marksman. That's great for him in his career. So that's why it makes as much noise as it does.
You know, it's interesting because we just heard a story the other day on on one of our BBC live events of a gentleman who was, and Todd, you may remember which weapon he was shooting, but he was so good at it that the man in charge said, "You just made corporal, and you're staying at the base, and you're training everybody how to use this weapon." And that he never saw combat, but he was just as much a part of winning the war. This was World War II. As the men who fought, because he was the guy who taught everybody how to use the weapon of choice.
Great memory. Yeah, that was from Wednesday night. That was a Marine, a World War II Marine telling that story.
Yeah. We got our Marine symbol down. Lauren, scuttlebutt me.
All right. Well, I'm going to talk about the sound-powered telephone. We live in a time where we can relate as veterans or non-veterans. There's a lot more storms, right? Hurricanes, a lot of power outages. It's just a part of, what's happening with the world. And I found myself in a situation, I just got back from New Jersey, like last week, that's where I'm from. And I had no comms whatsoever. And in this new COVID world of Zoom, I was, trying to text Todd and the team, like, I'm going to go to a thrift store and find an analog phone. And they were like, you're insane. What are you talking about? Just go take a deep breath and relax. Like, it's not that important, right? But for a military person, no comms is a certain death, right? In my head, I'm going to get fired, or I'm never going to make it out of Jersey alive, or I'm going to die, right? Like comms, like nothing happens without comms. So I'm a little bit of a nut about it. There's Todd's landline he's holding up. I love that phone. I have in my eBay cart, I have one of those, remember the lips and like the Garfield tail and like all those different ones. Yeah, I'm
worth
like
good money now.
Yeah, I'm like a quirky collector of like analog telephones. But the sound-powered telephone has been used since 1940 something in the United States Navy and the Coast Guard. And it is basically powered without electricity. It's powered by the pressure of your voice going in. So let's say this is part of the sound power telephone, right? So you put the earphones on like James has. The second part connects to your chest right here, and it actually has a thing like this. You push a little button on top and you speak into it. There's usually only 4 or 5 of them around the ship that are on the bulkhead or the wall. And then you have these portable ones. I would most often use it at battle stations, refueling, things like that, when maybe there's no power on the ship, so you still have comms. I would love to have sound powered telephone jacks in my house. Why don't we have that anymore? Why, when a cable company comes in and rewires your house, why do they take out the landlines? Like, it makes absolutely no sense to me, because while there is a small current of electricity in an analog phone at a house, on a Navy ship or a Coast Guard ship, it's actually mandated by inspection that you still have them to this day. So the technology has not changed at all. The same phone that you'll see in a 1944 Wikipedia search of a sound-powered telephone will be the exact same one you see in a female sailor looking much like me with it on. I find that fascinating. I love how sometimes technology still provides for us, and I wish I still had one for when big storms come and I'm scared.
James, you seem to have an idea there.
It sounded like the squawk boxes we use, where the technology just went from the one that was voice powered to ran on like D batteries. You hook it up to a spider box and went out. We still use those.
Yeah, because what good are the front guys without the guys in the back letting them know? Like, if you have no comms, like, can you echo what I said there? It's like that. I think it's probably the most crucial part of any kind of operation, if you will. Right?
Definitely the most important part of the Scuttlebutt is comms. If we don't have comms, we're not able to do our show.
We're dead in the water. We're dead in the water.
We're dead in the water. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so I'll wrap up with a couple two interesting headlines that I came across. One was the unsafe, unprofessional intercept of a United States B-52 by a Russian Sioux. This happens actually a lot more, to echo Todd, a lot more than we know about, and I'm surprised it doesn't happen even more often as you have surveillance planes flying close to international borders. But these planes will come in very close to a flying plane and pull maneuvers to fly over top of the cockpit, both traveling at incredible rates in the air, very unsafe. And this happens pretty regularly, much to the I'm sure the fear of the pilots within the B-52s. Does anybody have any thoughts on what the type of talent it takes to pull off a maneuver like this? You have to be a very skilled pilot to pull something like that off, and probably have a death wish.
Prefrontal cortex.
And a prefrontal cortex and a good solid stomach, right? So you're the type of person that can go on crazy roller coasters and not puke your guts out.
Yeah, very hard to do.
I am a roller coaster addict, and because I personally would love to fly in a fighter jet, and I will keep, oh please, James, you're shaking your head. God, watch any video on YouTube of a fighter jet taking off, and I will do that someday.
I would love to, except for there's been 2 instances that told me, well, first off, I don't have the greatest back on the face of the planet, so just the G-forces alone just doesn't sound like a smart idea. But if you've ever been in the desert like what I have behind my head and had one fly over you and understand exactly how fast that really is. Mm-hmm. So we've had flyovers that were like map of the earth. Like if we'd have threw a football and didn't know it was there, I think we might have hit a couple of them, but they're flying so fast that you don't know that they're there. They're coming in hot at 7, 8, 9, 100 miles an hour, and you don't see them off in the distance because that funny part about those Navy ships, they're huge until you get out in the middle of the ocean. And when they get their dispersion, you don't see that other one way down yonder. That plane comes in so fast that you don't know that it passed you if you're not looking until it's already gone past you. It's another thing when you see it and you're like, oh my goodness, and you watch the dust trail come off the ground. That's way too fast for me.
Not fast enough for me. And my last little bit of scuttlebutt, which I found on a really great website, that the Coast Guard has initiated Operation Bubba Gump. That this is named after the famous character from Forrest Gump, and it's a way for the Coast Guard to protect our massive shrimp market. That this is something that generates a lot of revenue, and these are maritime laws that they are protecting, but they've called it Operation Bubba Gump.
And is it to protect the shrimp from poaching or something like that?
Well, that's a great
question. Or is it environmental? We need to dig a little deeper into that Bubba Gump story.
Yeah.
To quote the article, enforcing U.S. fisheries and marine protected resource laws and regulations and ensuring the integrity of the U.S. Exclusive Economic Zone, EEZ, fall under the Coast Guard's Maritime Law Enforcement Program.
Hashtag save the shrimp.
Save the shrimp.
Yeah, that sounds like poaching to me.
We'll dive deeper. So that does it for our first episode of the Scuttlebutt. We thank you all for joining us. Again, we implore you to spread the Scuttlebutt by liking, sharing, subscribing, ringing the bell, and joining us every week. This is a pre-recorded program presented by the Veterans Breakfast Club. We also ask that you come and join us for a BBC live event. These happen live online Monday nights, Wednesday mornings, and a new program called Greatest Generation Live that will happen on Sunday afternoons. This is all ways that BBC is creating those communities of listening around veterans and their stories. Guys, anything to wrap us up?
Thanks for joining us, everyone.
All right, thanks for joining us, everyone. We'll see you next week.